I was standing on the sidewalk in the pouring rain with nothing but the clothes on my back and my purse when I remembered the card. My mother's old credit card, the one she'd given me years ago and told me to keep for emergencies. I'd never used it, never even thought about it really, just kept it tucked in a hidden pocket of my wallet out of sentiment. But now, homeless and desperate, after my husband had just thrown me out of our house, I pulled it out with shaking hands. The card was old, the numbers worn, but maybe it still worked. I walked into the nearest bank to see if I could withdraw some cash. What happened next changed everything. The teller's face went white when she swiped the card. Within minutes, the bank manager appeared. Then security, then people in expensive suits I'd never seen before. They were all staring at me like I was someone important, someone powerful. And that's when I learned the truth about who my mother really was. Before we dive into this incredible story, and trust me, you need to hear every detail of what I discovered, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Your support helps me bring you more amazing stories like this one. Now let's go back to the beginning. My name is Maya Chen, and 3 days ago I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was 32 years old, married to Derek Walsh for 5 years. Living what I thought was a comfortable middle-class life in Boston. I worked as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm, making decent money but nothing spectacular. Derek was a real estate broker, successful and ambitious, always talking about his next big deal. We lived in a nice townhouse in Brookline that Derek had bought before we got married, drove decent cars, went out to dinner regularly. I thought we were happy, or at least content. My mother, Lynn Chen, had passed away 2 years ago from cancer. She'd been a quiet woman, an immigrant from Taiwan who'd come to America in her 20s and worked as a seamstress in Boston's Chinatown for 40 years. She lived simply in a small apartment above the shop where she worked, never complained, never asked for anything. She'd raised me alone after my father died when I was 5, working long hours to give me opportunities she'd never had. I went to good schools, got a college degree, built a career, everything she'd dreamed of for me. When she got sick, I took care of her in her final months, and she died peacefully with me holding her hand. After the funeral, I'd gone through her small apartment, sorting through a lifetime of belongings. There wasn't much. Some clothes, some photos, her sewing supplies, a few pieces of simple jewelry, but in an envelope in her bedside drawer, I found a credit card with her name on it and a note in her careful handwriting, for Maya, for emergency only. Your mother loves you always. The card was from a bank I didn't recognize, some private institution I'd never heard of. I'd tucked it in my wallet, meaning to cancel it eventually, but I never did. It felt like keeping a piece of her with me. My marriage to Derek had been good at first. He was charming and successful, the kind of guy who knew how to make you feel special. But over the past year, things had changed. He'd become more critical, more controlling, more focused on appearances and status. He'd started making comments about my job, saying I should be more ambitious, that I was settling for mediocrity. He'd criticized my clothes, my hair, the way I decorated our home. Nothing I did was ever quite good enough. Then 3 months ago, Derek's behavior shifted dramatically. He started coming home late, being secretive with his phone, taking mysterious business trips. The classic signs of an affair. But when I'd try to talk to him about it, he'd accuse me of being paranoid and insecure. He'd turn everything around, make me feel like I was the problem, like my suspicions were proof of my own inadequacy rather than his betrayal. 2 weeks ago, I found out the truth by accident. I'd forgotten my laptop at home and came back during lunch to get it. Derek's car was in the driveway, but he hadn't mentioned being home. I walked in and heard voices upstairs in our bedroom. I crept up the stairs and pushed open the door to find Derek in bed with Stephanie, his business partner. They didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Derek just smirked at me and said, "Well, now you know. Saves me having to tell you." I stood there in shock while Stephanie gathered her clothes and walked past me like I was invisible. Derek got dressed casually, like this was no big deal, and told me we needed to talk. We went downstairs and he laid it out coldly. He wanted a divorce. He and Stephanie had been together for 6 months, and they were planning to get married as soon as our divorce was final. He'd already talked to a lawyer. The townhouse was his, bought before our marriage, so I had no claim to it. He wanted me out immediately. When I tried to argue, when I said we needed to discuss this properly and figure out a fair settlement, he laughed. He told me I had no leverage, That he'd made sure of that. He'd been documenting everything for months, painting me as an unstable, jealous wife. He had recordings of our arguments where I'd been crying and emotional. He'd told his friends and family that I'd been erratic and difficult. He'd built a case against me, he said, and if I tried to fight him in court, he'd destroy my reputation and make sure I got nothing. I was devastated, but I was also scared. Derek had a mean streak when he didn't get his way, and I could see he was enjoying this, enjoying having power over me. I asked for time to find a place to stay, to pack my things. He said no. He wanted me out now. That day, he'd already changed the locks. I just didn't know it yet. When I tried to go upstairs to pack a bag, he blocked me. He said I could come back for my things later with a police escort if necessary. But right now, I needed to leave. I grabbed my purse and my laptop bag. That was all I had. Derek pushed me toward the door, physically shoved me out onto the front steps. It was November in Boston, cold and starting to rain. I turned back and begged him to at least let me get a coat, but he just slammed the door in my face. I heard the deadbolt click. I stood there on the steps in shock, not quite believing this was happening. Then the rain started coming down harder and I had to move. I walked to a coffee shop a few blocks away and sat there trying to figure out what to do. I called my best friend Jenna, but she was out of town on a work trip. I thought about calling other friends, but I felt so ashamed, so humiliated. How do you tell people your husband just threw you out in the rain like garbage? I checked my bank account on my phone and felt my stomach drop. We'd had a joint account that Derek managed, and he'd cleaned it out. Every penny was gone. My personal account had about $300 in it, enough for maybe a week at a cheap motel. I sat there in that coffee shop as it got dark outside, watching the rain, trying not to cry in public. I needed money. I needed a place to stay. I needed to figure out my next move. That's when I remembered my mother's card. I pulled out my wallet and looked at it. This old credit card I'd never used. The bank name meant nothing to me. Celestial Trust and Financial. It sounded fancy, probably some boutique bank for wealthy clients. My mother had been a seamstress. Why would she have an account at a place like that? But I was desperate. Maybe there was a small credit limit on the card, enough to get me through a few days while I figured things out. I looked up the nearest branch of Celestial Trust and Financial on my phone. There was one downtown, about a 20-minute walk. I grabbed my things and headed out into the rain. The bank was in a historic building in the financial district, all marble and brass with doormen in uniforms. It looked like the kind of place where people like me didn't belong. I almost turned around, but I was soaked and cold and desperate. I walked through the revolving door and into an opulent lobby that looked more like a luxury hotel than a bank. There were leather couches, fresh flowers, art on the walls. A receptionist at a polished desk looked up at me with barely concealed disapproval, taking in my wet clothes and disheveled appearance. "Can I help you?" she asked in a tone that suggested she'd rather not. I walked up to the desk, clutching my mother's card. "I need to use this card. I need to withdraw some cash if possible." I handed her the card. She took it with 2 fingers like it might be contaminated and glanced at it. Then her expression changed completely. Her eyes widened and she looked from the card to me and back to the card. "One moment, please," she said, her voice suddenly much more respectful. She picked up a phone and spoke quietly into it. Within 30 seconds, a man in an expensive suit appeared from a hallway. He was in his 50s, silver-haired and distinguished, and he looked at me with intense curiosity. "I'm Gerald Price, the branch manager. You're attempting to use this card." He held it up. I nodded. "It was my mother's. She passed away 2 years ago, but she told me to keep it for emergencies. I just need to withdraw some cash if there's any credit available." Gerald Price's expression became unreadable. "Please, come with me." He led me through the lobby, past curious stares from other clients, into a private elevator. We rode up to the top floor in silence. He led me into an enormous corner office with views of the city, gestured for me to sit in a leather chair, and sat behind his massive desk. He was staring at me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Miss Chen, I need to verify your identity. Do you have identification?" I pulled out my driver's license with shaking hands. He examined it carefully, then typed something into his computer. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then picked up his phone. "I need you to come to my office immediately." "Yes, right now. It's urgent." He hung up and looked at me. "Can you tell me your mother's full name and date of birth?" I told him. "Lin Chen, born March 15th, 1954. He typed this into his computer, and his eyes widened slightly. "And when did she pass away?" November 2022, 2 years ago. He nodded slowly. And she gave you this card before she died? Yes. She left it for me with a note saying to use it in emergencies. Gerald Price leaned back in his chair, studying me. Miss Chen, do you have any idea what this card is connected to? I shook my head. I assumed it was just a regular credit card with maybe a small limit. My mother was a seamstress. She didn't have much money. The office door opened and two more people entered. A woman in her 40s in a designer suit and a younger man carrying a laptop. Gerald introduced them as Victoria Hart, Senior Vice President, and James Wu, Legal Counsel. They both stared at me with the same intense curiosity. Victoria Hart sat down across from me. Miss Chen, I'm going to ask you some questions and I need you to answer them honestly. What do you know about your mother's financial situation? I shrugged helplessly. She worked as a seamstress in Chinatown. She lived in a small apartment above the shop. She never had much money as far as I knew. When she died, I handled her estate. There was about $40,000 in her savings account, which surprised me, but I figured she'd just been very frugal all her life. I used most of it to pay for her funeral and her final medical expenses. The three executives exchanged glances. James Wu spoke for the first time. Did your mother ever mention investments, property holdings, business interests, anything like that? I shook my head. Never. She barely spoke about money at all. She just worked and saved and tried to give me a better life than she had. Victoria Hart leaned forward. Miss Chen, your mother had accounts with this bank that date back 45 years. She opened them when she first came to America. Over the decades, she made regular deposits, invested wisely, and accumulated a substantial portfolio. The card you're holding is connected to those accounts. I stared at her. What kind of substantial? Gerald Price turned his computer monitor so I could see it. On the screen was a list of accounts, investment portfolios, property holdings. The numbers were so large my brain couldn't process them at first. Millions. Tens of millions. I looked up at him in confusion. This can't be right. This must be someone else's account. It's your mother's account, Victoria Hart said gently. After her death, the accounts were flagged as dormant. We've been searching for her heir, for you, for 2 years. We had your name from her original paperwork, but we'd lost track of you. Your mother had listed her work address as her contact address, and that shop closed down. We'd been trying to locate you through conventional means, but weren't having much luck. And now you've walked in with her emergency card? I felt like I was going to pass out. How much money are we talking about? James Wu consulted his laptop. As of today's valuation, approximately $68 million in liquid assets and investments, plus property holdings in Boston, New York, and San Francisco worth approximately another $40 million. Your mother's total estate is valued at just over $100 million. And you, as her sole heir, inherit everything. The room spun. I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. $100 million. My mother, the seamstress who'd lived in a tiny apartment and worked every day until she got too sick to continue, had been worth $100 million. It was impossible. It made no sense. How? I whispered. How did a seamstress accumulate this kind of money? Victoria Hart smiled slightly. Your mother was an incredibly savvy investor. When she first came to America in 1980, she started working and saving immediately. She opened her first account with us with $5,000, which was a significant sum for a new immigrant. Over the years, she made regular deposits, never large amounts, but consistent. And she invested brilliantly. She bought property in Chinatown and other parts of Boston when it was cheap in the 80s. She invested in tech stocks in the 90s before they exploded. She diversified into international markets, into emerging technologies, always smart, always patient. Gerald Price added, your mother came in personally once a year to review her portfolio with our investment team. She never touched the money, never withdrew anything except small amounts for living expenses. She told us repeatedly that this money was for her daughter, for you. She wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of after she was gone. She lived simply, worked hard, and built an empire in secret, so you'd have security and freedom. I started crying then, couldn't help it. All those years, I'd watched my mother work herself to exhaustion, wearing the same simple clothes, eating cheap food, never complaining. I'd thought she was struggling, barely getting by. I'd offered to help her financially when I started my career, and she'd always refused, saying she had everything she needed. Now I understood why. She'd been secretly wealthy the entire time, accumulating this massive fortune, and she'd never told me because she wanted me to build my own life, to work hard, to appreciate what I had rather than relying on wealth I hadn't earned. Victoria Hart handed me tissues. Your mother left very specific instructions about how she wanted her estate handled after her death. She didn't want you to know about the money until you genuinely needed it, she said, and I quote, "My daughter must learn to stand on her own feet first. When she faces real hardship, when she truly needs help, then she will find what I've left her." She designed the emergency card as a trigger. If you ever used it, we'd know you were in trouble and it was time to release the inheritance to you. I wiped my eyes. She planned all of this. James Wu nodded, very carefully. She even left you a letter that we were instructed to give you when you claimed the inheritance. He handed me an envelope. I opened it with shaking hands and pulled out several pages in my mother's handwriting. The letter was dated 3 months before she died. "My dearest Maya," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you've found yourself in difficult circumstances and have used the emergency card I left you. I'm sorry you've had to face hardship, but I'm also glad, because it means you're about to discover the gift I've been building for you your entire life. I never told you about the money because I wanted you to grow up normal, to work hard, to appreciate the value of things. I've seen too many children of wealthy parents become spoiled and entitled, and I didn't want that for you." The letter continued, "I came to America with nothing. I worked in sweatshops. I saved every penny. I invested wisely. I built this fortune not for myself but for you, so you would never have to struggle the way I did, so you would have choices and freedom and security. But I also wanted you to have character, to be strong and capable and independent. So I lived simply and let you believe we had little, while secretly ensuring your future would be unlimited. Now that you've found this money, use it wisely. Use it to help others. Use it to build something meaningful, and know that every dollar represents my love for you and my hope for your happiness. Your mother, forever, Lin Chen." I couldn't stop crying. My mother had loved me so much, had sacrificed and planned and protected me in ways I'd never imagined. And now, on the worst day of my life, when I'd been thrown out with nothing, she'd reached out from beyond the grave to save me. Victoria Hart let me cry for a few minutes, then gently said, "Miss Chen, we need to begin the process of transferring these accounts into your name. It will take a few days to complete all the paperwork, but we can advance you funds immediately if you need them. Do you have a safe place to stay?" I shook my head. "My husband just kicked me out. That's the emergency. He threw me out of our house, took all the money from our joint account, and left me with nothing. I have nowhere to go." Gerald Price stood up immediately. "That's unacceptable. We have a client suite here in the building for situations like this. You can stay there tonight, and tomorrow we'll help you find appropriate accommodations. In the meantime, how much do you need immediately?" I had no idea how to answer that question. How much did I need? Yesterday I would have said a few $100s would help. Now I had access to 100 million. I don't know. I admitted. James Wu said, "Let's start with $1 million in your personal checking account so you have operating funds. We'll open new accounts in your name only that your husband has no access to. We'll also need to discuss your divorce situation and make sure your assets are protected." The next several hours were a blur of paperwork and signatures and conversations with lawyers and financial advisors. By the time they finished, I had a new checking account with $1 million in it, a new debit card, and a folder full of documents explaining my inheritance. Victoria Hart personally walked me to the client suite, a luxurious apartment on the top floor of the bank building with a bedroom, bathroom, living area, and kitchenette. "Get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow we'll start helping you put your life back together." Derek nodded, trying to look impressed, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was trying to figure out exactly how rich I was, exactly how badly he'd miscalculated when he'd thrown me away. "That's great. Really great. I always knew you had it in you to do something meaningful." I smiled. "No, you didn't. You thought I was mediocre. Remember? You told me I was settling for a small life, but it turns out the only small thing in our marriage was your vision." His face flushed. "Look, Maya, I know I handled things badly. I was going through something, confused about what I wanted. I never meant to hurt you. You absolutely meant to hurt me," I corrected gently. "You were cruel on purpose because you could be. You threw me out with nothing because you enjoyed having that power. You just didn't anticipate that it would backfire so spectacularly." I leaned in closer. "Here's what I learned from our marriage, Derek. You taught me that I'd been settling, but not in the way you meant. I'd been settling for a man who didn't see my value, who didn't appreciate what I brought to the relationship. Leaving you, or rather being forced out by you, was the best thing that could have happened to me. So, thank you. Derek opened his mouth to respond, but I'd already turned away. I'd said what I needed to say. He didn't deserve more of my time or energy. I walked back to the group of friends I'd come with, all successful women I'd met through my foundation work, and didn't look back. That's the real revenge I've learned. Not making your ex suffer, though Derek was certainly suffering in his own way, dealing with the consequences of his choices. The real revenge is building a life so much better than anything you had before that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant. They become a footnote in your story, a brief, difficult chapter that led to your transformation, rather than the main character. Now, 3 years after that rainy night when Derek kicked me out, I can honestly say I'm grateful for how things turned out. If Derek hadn't betrayed me, if he hadn't thrown me out in my most vulnerable moment, I never would have used my mother's emergency card. I never would have discovered her gift, her love expressed through decades of careful planning and sacrifice. I would have stayed in a mediocre marriage with a mediocre man, never knowing my true worth or the legacy my mother had built for me. My mother's final gift wasn't just the money, though that certainly changed my practical circumstances. Her real gift was showing me that I came from strength, that I was the daughter of a woman who'd built an empire in secret while wearing the disguise of humility. She taught me that power doesn't have to be loud or obvious, that the quietest people sometimes hold the most cards, that patience and planning and working in silence can create outcomes nobody sees coming. And she taught me one more thing through her letter and her legacy, that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She didn't need to show off her wealth or make others feel small. She just built security and options and freedom for me, and let that be enough. That's what I'm trying to do now. Paying her gift forward by helping other women build their own security and options and freedom. So that's my story. The story of how being kicked out by my husband led me to discover my mother's secret fortune and transformed my entire life. It's a reminder that sometimes our lowest moments are actually doorways to something better. Sometimes the people who hurt us are actually freeing us for opportunities we couldn't have imagined. And sometimes the help we need has been waiting for us all along. We just needed to be desperate enough to reach for it. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here, for being part of this community where we share our experiences and lift each other up. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Would you have handled things differently? What would you do if you suddenly discovered you'd inherited a fortune? I want to hear your thoughts and your own stories. And if this story resonated with you, if it helped you see your own difficult situation in a new light, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future stories of transformation, strength, and unexpected victories. I'm looking forward to reading your comments and connecting with you all. On the screen, you can see 2 more incredible stories about people who turned their worst moments into new beginnings. There's so much more content on this channel, stories of survival and revenge and finding yourself when life falls apart. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Until next time, remember this: you are worth more than anyone's opinion of you. Your value doesn't depend on anyone's recognition. And sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the universe pushing you toward your real destiny. Take care of yourselves. Be strong. And know that your story isn't over just because someone tried to write you out of theirs. With love and respect, I'll see you in the next one.